Hey guys, so today we're going to talk a little bit about arguments for the existence of God. Um, Stan sent me, I asked him for questions and specific prompts, and that was almost a mistake because he ended up sending me a bunch, which was way more than I bargained for. But anyway, the way I've decided to approach this is to walk through a few different types of evidences we give for why one ought to believe that God exists, and they're kind of in different categories. So I'm not going to get super into detail on each one. I'm going to leave that up to you guys to do your own research. But what I'm going to do is kind of start you off with a few different categories. So the first would be um, we'll talk about cosmological reasons. So when I say cosmological, I mean origins of the universe. Now, first of all, a real quick sort of reason to believe in God would be God is probably the best explanation for why there is something rather than nothing. And when I say something rather than nothing, I mean that anything at all exists, period, rather than there just not being anything. Have you ever thought about that? Is the universe necessary? Meaning that it must exist in all possible worlds. Could there be a possible world that's just nothing whatsoever? I don't even know if you could call that a possible world because saying it's a world implies that there's something, but this would be that there just is nothing, period. Um, I don't know. That's going to be important because the first argument, cosmological type argument, would be one that William Lane Craig is famous for defending, and that's called the Kalam cosmological argument. And the Kalam goes like this. It's got two premises and a conclusion. Pretty simple. The first premise is everything that begins to exist has a cause. This fits very well with our scientifically known laws of physics. It fits well with the evidence we have for the existence of our universe, at least the origins of our universe. Big Bang cosmology is pretty well supported. It was predicted. Um, I don't know how into detail to get here. Uh, but anyway, there have been recent discoveries like the detection of gravitational waves that were predicted by, I think, maybe by Einstein, could be wrong on that, that they've recently discovered has pointed to that our universe had a beginning. Um, our whole universe is expanding. If you think if it's expanding now, that meant at one time it was smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you get to a singularity where the laws of physics kind of break down. Um, but kind of the point is we have a universe that began to exist. It is not an eternal universe. And a lot of the evidences for God, a lot of times just talking with people, it comes down to what is eternal. Because materialists or atheists have ways of telling their own story about maybe how our universe could come into being without it being eternal itself. Because um, the evidence we have, the scientific evidence we have, does not support an eternally existing universe. Um, like I said, William Lane Craig is great on this. He has lectures where he goes through other theories about the universe, such as the idea of a universe that expands and then contracts back, and then almost kind of expands the other way over billions and billions of years, and why those theories don't really seem to pan out. But I'm going to show you this. This is what I was talking about a second ago. My handwriting's bad, but I bet Stan can decipher it. If you want to hit pause, Stan. It's the Kalam cosmological argument. So I said premise one was anything that begins to exist has a cause. That's premise one. Premise two is the universe began to exist. And I already said there's a lot of evidence to support that. Big Bang cosmology is still king in the scientific world, and that all points to a universe with a beginning. So the conclusion is, therefore, the universe had a cause. Now that is where things get messy, because, well, how, if something begins to exist and has a cause, and the universe has a cause, but everything we know of that exists is already in the universe, then what could have caused the universe? And I'm not sure if Craig does this, but that could lead you to need to add another conclusion, which would be the cause of the universe needs to be something eternal, something that always exists. Because when you get right down to it, either the universe is something that just is a brute fact, as they would say, it just is, and it is eternal, which our scientific evidence does not support, or something else is eternal that could have caused the universe. We'll circle back around to this. Actually, I'll address it now. So, materialists and atheists, there are some other theories out there about perhaps we are just one universe in an infinite multiverse of universes that are come into existence by other universes expanding and kind of makes bubbles and new universes. But this is a problem because you still have to backtrack to what got the first one started. So anyway, I would say look at William Lane Craig, look at the Kalam. That's just one kind of realm. There are other versions of cosmological arguments, but I'm just trying to give you like big categories. A second argument for God, this falls into broadly conceived intelligent design ideas, but it would be the fine-tuning reason, and I would suggest Robin Collins to you to research. Get his name on there. Robin Collins. I think he's at Notre Dame. I might be wrong. Maybe he's not. But the fine-tuning arguments, and there are many, many fine-tuning arguments, is that not only does our Earth seem unique in that it supports life, but there are laws in the universe that are very precise, that if they were altered just a little bit, the universe could not exist. So, for example, the gravitational forces in the first microseconds, nanoseconds of the Big Bang would have had to been just right. The expansion and contraction forces would have had to been so precise that it would be like, I think it was Penrose, who's a physicist at either Oxford or Cambridge, say it'd be like taking a shot at a 1-inch target on the other side of the universe and hitting it bullseye. The size of electrons and protons and neutrons, if they, they're immensely small, but if their sizes were just, if an electron was just 3 times bigger than it is, which would be 3 times nothing that you could ever really conceive of, the universe would fall apart. If a neutron or a proton, if it's either a neutron or proton was 3 times bigger, we'd only have hydrogen. There'd be no life permitting in the universe. There are scientific constants, and once again, there's your expert, that permit life. So much so that if you actually look at the probability numbers, even with all, there are a lot of people who think, well, there are so many trillions of stars and trillions of planets, surely there are other ones that have life on them. Actually, if you look at the probability numbers and what it takes to have a life-permitting planet, that even with trillions more out there, the chances are much higher that they don't permit life than they do. So fine-tuning, that's a second very broad category. I'm not getting into heavy detail. You need to research it more yourself. Fine-tuning, like I said, is like a subset of intelligent design. Intelligent design a lot of times is misconstrued as Christian creationism. They're not the same thing. Design just means we see very complex structures in the universe, such as human DNA. And the idea is if you see complexity in organization, you infer a designer. So if we were to land another rover on Mars and all of a sudden saw someone had built a functioning, like there was like a dome with like life inside of it, we would assume someone built that even if we didn't know who, because it's evidence of design. Or if we went to Mars, doesn't even have to be that complicated, and saw pyramids of stones that had perfect angles stacked into a perfect pyramid, we would assume that was built by someone because we see design. We infer design all the time, and because of the complexities of the universe, we should infer a designer. So that's kind of category number 2. First category was just cosmological, broadly speaking, such as the Kalam, what created the universe. Is there anything eternal, which the Christian would say is God. Second was fine-tuning, which is kind of part of intelligent design. Another kind of area are more experiential, more existential. For example, God is the best explanation of morality or objective morality. Now, a lot of people will say, well, evolutionary theory gives us a basis for morality, meaning that people who just so happen to value certain things like not murdering or whatever, or other things, helped make society flourish, and the people who didn't value those things were either killed off or what have you. Basically, the idea is that what we think are morals, some sort of higher standard and calling that exists out there, are really just things that helped us survive as a species. That's sort of what the non-supernatural argument for morality is. The problem with that is that if that's the case, then actually those morals are just preferences that don't have any objective grounding, and there's no actual reason that you have to hold to them. People say, well, it's good for the species. Well, that doesn't provide an answer as why should I care if the species gets what's best for it. There's actually a big group of people out there right now that are starting to say it's immoral to have children because you're bringing more humans into this world and the world can't support it. So, there are people out there who don't necessarily think that there really is any value to humans. Whereas, here's the moral argument for God's existence, another 3 premise. Premise 1 is objective moral values and duties do exist. Something like it's wrong to torture babies just for the fun of it, or infants or toddlers. It's wrong to torture a toddler just for the fun of it. Is that true or false? Now, that can only be true if objective morality exists, because if it doesn't, then it's just preference. There's no really way to prove it. There's no basis for it. So that's premise 1. Objective moral values and duties exist. Premise 2 is, if objective morality exists, there must be an objective lawgiver or source so that you can differentiate between right and wrong. If you know something's good or bad, you need a third thing to tell you which is which. So that's premise 2. So premise 3 is, I think I've messed this up. Let's see, objective morals do exist. If objective morals exist, they need a lawgiver. Because they do exist, I got it backwards. So premise 1, I'm sorry guys, I'm really sorry. premise one would be, if objective moral values and duties exist, they need an objective referent, something to refer to that provides those objective morals and values. Premise two is objective moral values do exist. And so the conclusion would be, therefore, an objective lawgiver does exist, which that can't be something that's just material. That would have to be God or gods or something that goes beyond our material world or higher than us. So that's a third sort of category of arguments for why God exists. Now, and also on this topic, William Lane Craig is very good. Now, I'm going to get in real quick. I've got about 4 minutes to get into some pitfalls. There are reasons before you go straight to the Bible, because remember, you've got to kind of at least get people to the point where they're willing to believe that maybe there is a God before you start throwing Bible verses at them, if they're not in a place that they're going to listen, because the next question is, okay, let's say there is a God of some kind. How can we possibly know anything about that God? For example, one very famous atheist fun thing is, for all we know, God could be a flying spaghetti monster. A flying ball of meatballs and noodles that is actually controlling the universe but keeps itself hidden from us so we don't know. I could just as easily believe in a flying spaghetti monster as I could the God you're talking about. Now, this is usually just a way to kind of like shame people who believe in God or a specific God into admitting they don't have much to go on. Well, I'm just going to give you this as an example to start seeing how you can start thinking about these things. Because of the Kalam cosmological argument and the intelligent design arguments, it's not like that we believe in God but have no reasons to think he has any type of characteristics. So, if God is uncaused, that would mean he's probably non-material, because as far as we know, any material thing that has a beginning has a cause. So there's a characteristic of God that we can infer from the cosmological arguments, that God is immaterial. And given the size and complexity of the universe, we can probably infer that this God is very powerful and very intelligent to be able to create something like this. So those are characteristics. So we have non-material, eternal, powerful, intelligent, all from the cosmological arguments and the intelligent design arguments. Those are characteristics of God. Whereas a flying spaghetti monster, well, if he's made of spaghetti, that's material. I like to counter with this. Suppose the world, instead of grass, the grass was made of noodles, the ground was made of noodles, and the oceans were made of pasta sauce. Now then you might have a reason to think that God, who created all things, is something like, or at least, this doesn't go into like eternal things, but you could think maybe God is something like a flying spaghetti monster, because if the ground is noodles and the oceans are pasta sauce and the mountains are meatballs, you might have a reason to think there's a spaghetti God out there, but you just don't. You're just saying that. But we have good reason to think that there's a non-material, eternal, intelligent, powerful God out there. The moral arguments, the fact that we so abhor evil, but that we can do good, we can choose to do evil or good, the fact that most people believe love exists and find good in that and bad in evil, might be reasons to believe that God has purposes for things, that maybe that he's loving, that we find harmony when people are loving and disharmony when they're not, could be reasons to point to add on another characteristic about God's love. We all have a sense of justice. You see where I'm going with this. So, I wouldn't let people trick you into thinking there's no reason to think that God is anything like what you say. I'm already at 20 minutes. I know I didn't get into too many specifics. I'm going to show you this again. But I hope that helps. Maybe you can just pick one and go with it. I hope that helps frame some things for you. I would recommend William Lane Craig to you, Robin Collins. Even at a more popular level, maybe to get started, something like The Case for the Creator by Lee Strobel might be a good resource. I'm going to write this down. Lee Strobel. And he quotes Collins. He kind of helps condense things from very, very intelligent people into a one digestible book. Might be a good place to start. John Lennox really helps frame the idea that somehow science and belief in God are opposed. That because we have learned and we can see some of the mechanisms that help the universe evolve, therefore we don't need a creator. He would say that's silly. That's like saying that because we understand the laws of physics inside the internal combustion engine, that we no longer need Henry Ford to make the car, as if the car would just create itself. No, you need both. There's a difference between the agent, God / Henry Ford, and the mechanisms he used. The laws of physics / the assembly line. You can see why those two things are not at odds with each other. They work in perfect harmony, but I'm already over time. Maybe we'll get a smaller, narrower topic next time that I can actually go into more detail with. Take care, guys.